We will make America great again.
The American media is obsessed with President Trump, despite the fact that most 24-hour news outlets spend about 23 of those hours talking about Trump. There are things he has done that they haven't covered. So fake news or not, click on that subscribe button and let's go through some of the things Trump has done that the media hasn't covered. The unemployment rate. Supporters of President Trump and even Trump himself will point out that while he has had very little to do with unemployment numbers, they and the rest of the economy are doing extremely well. The thing about the economy is, it has multiple moving parts and is an absolute behemoth. Because of that, it takes a lot of time for an economy this size to make substantive changes. Trump is taking credit for something largely created by his predecessor, Barack Obama.
And so I want to be very clear here.
However, Trump can get credit for a lot of the so-called enthusiasm in the economy, namely in Wall Street. But he can't take full, or some would say any credit for something that was started years before he took office. This graph will show the unemployment rate hit a low 4.3% in July. During the campaign, Trump and other conservatives said the unemployment rate was the result of cooked books and that it didn't include the amount of people who simply stopped receiving unemployment benefits. Trump had a semi-famous quote during the campaign saying, "Don't believe these phony numbers.
The number's probably 28, 29, as high as 35. In fact, I even heard recently 42%.
Funny that now that Trump is president, the numbers are real again. The media isn't covering Trump's role in the unemployment numbers, and to some, that's a sign they're biased. Some say there's a Trump effect that has buoyed short-term hiring because of the promise of tax cuts and deregulation. But as with everything Trump, you never know what the actual deal is. Budget surplus. The government has been running a major deficit since George W. Bush decided to slash taxes for the richest Americans back in 2001. His predecessor, Bill Clinton, had created a budget surplus of his own, and a major point of the campaigns of both W. Bush and his opponent, former Vice President Al Gore, was what the government should do with that money. Gore, ever the boring goody-goody, said that it should be placed in a lockbox, something he was made fun of for. W. Bush, ever his father's son, went the conservative route and said if there's a surplus, people are being overcharged with their taxes, so cut those taxes. And boy did he. Since then, the government hasn't had a surplus, until April of 2017. Now a few disclaimers, as April is typically a surplus month because it's tax season, and the amount of tax receipts the IRS receives gives the government a ton of money to spend. There was also the fact that corporations paid their taxes in April after a change from them typically paying in March. So the government had a lot of the money that they'd make for the entire year from both people and corporations. But regardless of the fact that Trump hasn't implemented his tax plan yet, there was still a budget surplus under his watch. He's the president overseeing a surplus while tapping his fingers together and saying, "Excellent." Supreme Court. Since the terror attacks of September 11, 2001, the executive branch of government has expanded its role and power in an attempt to give the president unilateral power when it comes to fighting the war on terror or even saving the economy. Most of that power comes from so-called executive orders. Trump used those orders to pass or change more legislation than almost any president since the 1940s.
Thank you very much.
However, as all this shows, these things can be undone and thus carry a lot less weight than perhaps the most important role a president has, besides commander-in-chief, and that's the ability to pick a Supreme Court justice. Now, the media did cover the fact that Trump elevated Neil Gorsuch to the court, but they didn't cover it as an accomplishment. Rather, it was something that needed to be undone. There was a lot of anger about that selection since the vacancy that needed filling actually came under his predecessor, Barack Obama. Justice Antonin Scalia died almost a year prior in February of 2016. There is a standing courtesy that if an opening comes in the last year of a president's term, they must wait until their successor takes office. Obama attempted to buck that trend by nominating Merrick Garland, but the Republican-controlled Senate ignored the nomination until Trump took over. It was unheard of because technically President Obama still had the power to nominate a justice. Gorsuch is a decent selection and not the zany pick many feared Trump would nominate, like Judge Judy. You down with TPP? Globalization has erased borders, especially when it comes to trade, and has created a sort of race to the bottom when it comes to which country can offer the cheapest labor. Because of that, the United States has regions like the Rust Belt, an ironic nod to the fact that entire towns are filled with abandoned buildings that used to be homes to factories and good-paying jobs. Trump ran against trade agreements that perpetuated this trend.
It's rigged by big businesses who want to leave our country, fire our workers.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership became a symbol of everything that's wrong with globalization, including but not limited to those who actually got Trump elected. Hillary Clinton was for the TPP before she turned against it. That hurt her chances big time, especially considering then-current President Obama was described as working fervently for the partnership. Once Trump took office, one of the first things he did was sign an executive order that officially withdrew the United States from the TPP, even if it still needed to pass a Congress that had members who called the chances of the TPP passing bleak. Border security. If there's any one community that treats Trump like Voldemort and is so afraid of him that they refuse to even speak his name, it's the immigrant community, both legal and illegal. The number of illegal border crossings from Mexico to the US dropped over 40% in February from the previous month, Trump's first full month in office. Like many points on this list, the numbers were trending that way even before Trump took office. Yet, it has still been labeled the Trump effect by different sources. Even CNN used the term, and they're probably the most outspoken network about Trump. Now, Trump is struggling to get his wall built.
That ceiling is much lower than my wall.
Mexico flat out refused to pay for it, and Trump is now threatening to shut down the government that his party controls if funding for the wall isn't included in the upcoming funding bill.
Believe me, if we have to close down our government, we're building that wall.
The reality is he may not even need one because immigrants are so afraid of being raided by Trump. Reining in the EPA. If you're on the libertarian side of the aisle, you'll applaud Trump for this. The man he appointed to run the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, ironically sued the agency multiple times in the past. He had even called for it to be disbanded. This is Trump's way of making good on his campaign promise that he would eliminate the EPA.
We are going to end the EPA intrusion into your lives.
He accused it of overstepping its boundaries and making it hard for businesses to thrive with all the smothering regulations, i.e., making it hard to dump their chemicals into the rivers. Even though Trump's party, the Republicans, control Congress, and they're against the EPA as well, President Trump also signed an executive order that, while vague, helped limit the EPA. The order stated that all heads of branch departments, i.e. Pruitt, should eliminate all unnecessary agencies and reorganize those that remain to improve their efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability. While the order did give branch directors 6 months to accomplish this goal, Pruitt got started right away as apparently, at least according to CNN, reining in the EPA was one of Trump's top priorities when he got into office. Again, depending on where you lay on the political spectrum, this is either an amazing move for small businesses or something quite horrific for public safety and the future of the planet. Energy. One of the larger stories of 2016 was the Dakota Access Pipeline protests by numerous Sioux tribes at the Standing Rock Reservation. The protest drew worldwide attention. They argued the pipeline threatened their environmental and economic well-being. They also claimed it destroyed sites of great historic, religious, and cultural significance. Despite those legitimate gripes and their very real fear the pipeline would eventually leak, especially near Lake Oahe, which is their main source of water, Trump approved the pipeline. While the pipeline benefits each state it runs through, from northern North Dakota all the way to Illinois, it also may not have been necessary. The United States is one of the largest producers of natural gas in the world. It makes sense the party that chanted "drill baby drill" at rallies would find no fault with building an oil pipeline that has already spilled multiple times in and around water sacred to a group of people the United States government has let down time and time again.
So let's drill, baby, drill, baby, drill.
But hey, it'll save people a fraction of a cent at the pump, so worth it? The housing market. Back in 2011, a little under 3 years after the housing market collapsed and almost brought the world economy to its knees, houses were on the market for an average of 84 days. Since last month, however, houses only remain on the market for an average of 45 days. Like most everything on this list, it's hard to give complete credit to anyone for something that has so many moving parts. For example, 0% interest rates helped spur a lot of home purchases. That started years ago, of course, but it's reached peak levels this year. Also, housing prices spiked in February, a month after Trump took office, by 5.8%. That was the sharpest rise in prices in almost 3 years. In Minneapolis, the median price of a home is now $225,000, a 20% surge since the housing implosion in 2008. Realtors across the country are calling this a housing boom. Since this took place under Trump, his followers give him credit for it. Manufacturing boost. The Rust Belt exists because of the flight of manufacturing from the United States since the late 60s or early 70s when globalization started. The Manufacturing Index, MI, is based on a set of surveys of more than 300 manufacturing firms that ask questions about confidence, hiring, profit and loss, etc. After Trump was elected, the MI reached a level that it hadn't in almost 35 years. Because it's based on optimism, a lot like the stock market, it's easy to see why the index reached that level. Trump signed an executive order reducing regulations on manufacturers.
And we're reducing unnecessary regulations.
The Donald ran an American First platform, promising things difficult to accomplish. Things like betraying Republican principles by interfering with the inner workings or decisions of a corporation or company. Before and after the election, Trump was calling out companies for outsourcing their manufacturing work. It brought him a lot of working-class votes, even from union members who typically vote Democrat. While Trump has gotten some firms to keep their jobs in America, outsourcing is still a real thing. Some find Trump's promises hollow, considering he and his family have consistently used foreign manufacturing for the products they sell.
Eyes are made into China.
And yet the manufacturing sector is still buying what Trump is selling, for now. Cutting regulations. Since he took office, Trump has altered or repealed many regulations put in place by his predecessors. Some of the most important include the repeal of the Dodd-Frank Act, a regulation put in place as a response to the financial crisis of 2008. Conservatives loathe regulations, so they applauded that move. But that applause turned into outright amazement when Trump signed an executive order that stated that for every new regulation the government creates, 2 must be removed in its place. That means that eventually the American government could have only 1 regulation. Conservatives believe that capitalism makes a lot of government and regulations redundant, as the invisible hand of the market will create its own rules and regulations. They believe people's safety is inherent in a company's business model. They don't want to kill their customers. It's bad for business. However, history and current reality has shown that while in theory that makes a ton of sense, it never pans out in real life because greed supersedes all else. There are countless examples of this, like the tobacco industry or the companies that know that their coal ash is leaking into drinking water. Either way, it's been the most important move Trump made in his young presidency. And since odds in Vegas have Trump out of office by the end of the year, it could be the most important of his entire administration.
The new thing is this. The new thing is, how do we stop Trump? Everyone's trying to figure out how to stop Trump.
You can beat the odds by checking out our other videos, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.